Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here once again. I wanted to share an article with all of you that I came across just recently. This was just posted on LewRockwell.com, and this is written by C.J. Maloney. And I wanted to share this with all of you because I think it really demonstrates the current state of things right now, and how, in actuality, although it seems worse than it has been in the recent past, it is still largely a consistent version of how things have been for the better part of the last 70 years. And to kind of state my case, I'm going to read from this first, and then afterwards I'm going to provide some of my own commentary, and then I'll ask for your thoughts as well. This covers a book that was written by an individual named Paul Fussfeld, who was a big fan of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is the father of what we now know as modern America. And it proceeds as such. What does it say about a man when he comes across as a scoundrel in a book, even when beloved by the author? That question came to mind repeatedly when I was reading Paul Fussfeld's The Economic Thought of Franklin D. Roosevelt and the Origins of the New Deal. Well written and engaging, Fussfeld's in-depth study of FDR's intellectual growth is, to my mind, one of the most important studies of the man and, by extension, the New Deal and the birth of modern America. A scion of landed aristocrats from New York's Hudson Valley, young Franklin was raised up in a cocoon of luxury. Much of the family fortune had come through running opium in China. A not ironic fact, since FDR himself would become the slayer of alcohol prohibition, though as an aside he would later go on to ban marijuana, likely in order to placate the objections of temperance Christians who had first pushed for alcohol prohibition based on erroneous interpretations of the Bible. Continuing on now. Sent at an early age to the exclusive prep school at Groton, where he took an active interest in the debating society, FDR's intellectual growth and all that was to come from it began at Harvard, where his teachers were not men who believed in a laissez-faire society. On the origins of his political maturation, FDR always considered his cousin Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson as his political preceptors. He took to heart his cousin's belief that every man holds his property subject to the general right of the community to regulate its use, ergo classical socialistic thought. And Wilson's 1913 political tract, The New Freedom, became a blueprint for much of FDR's political philosophy. And as an aside, if any of you have read The New Freedom, which I have, it is an exercise in one of the most irrational forms of political philosophy on an international scale that I think I've ever read in my life. I don't know what kind of psychosis Wilson was suffering from, but it must have been rather devastating. Continuing now. Molded into an unabashedly collectivist and materialist progressive, and with his head filled with economics of the Harvard variety, by the time he ran for president in 1932, FDR was so poorly educated that he believed economic laws are not made by nature, they are made by human beings. Having contracted a raging infection of hubris along with his college degree, his proposed solution for every perceived social ill was planning on a national scale. Any concern for the individual rights such planning would trample was non-existent in his mind, as the struggle for liberty of the community rather than the liberty of the individual was his goal. And by liberty we mean happiness and prosperity, not freedom. Fussfeld takes note that FDR did not suggest any limits on the power of the state or any reserved areas of personal liberty. The New Deal would prove as much. From such a reactionary outlook, it's not surprising to find FDR sneering, "It's all very well to talk of the sanctity of private property, as respecting such limits would get in the way of his big plans." Government, in his view, was an agency to promote and guide all the people into better ways of living. Humility and allowing others' freedom to choose were not FDR's strong points, nor, as the author freely admits, was economics. The FDR administration would prove itself to be a fatal mix of ignorance, hubris, and a sordid addiction to power. In sympathy with his close advisor, Rexford Tugwell's urge to make America over, FDR's fanaticism over the Back to the Land movement, which he described as the great fundamental of making country life in every way as desirable as city life, pops up repeatedly throughout the book. An ardent believer in the reordering and blending of rural and city life through a more even distribution of the population, he believed the undirected mushroom growth of our cities and towns must be contained. This deeply held conviction would lead directly to the building of Arthurdale and the creation of the Division of Subsistence Homesteads, one of the New Deal's most influential projects. Well written though the book undoubtedly is, the author's efforts to absolve every transgression of FDR's are too obvious, and due to FDR's character, too often put in an appearance. For one example, concerning FDR's use of the Panic of 1920 to attack speculative middlemen as the cause of price inflation, the most Fussfeld can muster in response is to call it a clear example of his political disingenuousness. His letters at the time indicate he was well aware of the basic causes of inflation. In another example of FDR's disingenuousness, the book shows that for his 1932 campaign platform he called for a sound currency, ergo gold, balanced budgets, and the elimination of special advantages, special favors, special privileges wherever possible. Desperate to judge FDR on his words, the author states nothing shows better how far Roosevelt was from the socialists than this statement, completely ignoring the fact that FDR immediately broke every single one of those promises upon taking the presidency. Words are cheap. And in FDR's case, often misleading, as just a few pages later the author lets slip that FDR's utterances are not good guides to his thinking, which is a polite way of saying that the man was a habitual liar. It gets to the point you almost feel sorry for Fussfeld and his inability to control his hero worship, never more so than when he claims FDR did not advocate a system of comprehensive central planning for the entire economy, after he had just spent an entire book proving the contrary. FDR used the crisis of the Great Depression to full advantage. No president before or since has had such a cult of personality built about him. He was the most pure, unadulterated politician we have ever seen, with a prenatal ability to sniff out political opportunity like a dog after a meat bone. His wish, "I favor economic planning not for this period alone, but for our needs for a long time to come," is embodied in everything we are. And 78 years after he founded our nation, and 67 years after he breathed his last, we grasp onto his New Deal as tightly as ever. While still a student at Harvard, FDR confided his disagreement with a political maneuver of his cousin Teddy. "I think that the president made a serious mistake to make the executive power stronger than Congress. It is bound to be a bad thing, especially when a man of weaker personality succeeds him in office." It was to be the sad culmination of his life's work that FDR himself would become that very man. FDR is the father of our nation, and by this time America can scarce imagine any other world than the one he has created for us. It is high time we took him down from the pedestal he sits on and examine more closely the man he truly was. Buried deep in the footnotes of Fussfeld's book is an appraisal of FDR by a contemporary who described him as an opportunist who did every act from the standpoint of how it would benefit him politically. He had no standard of right and wrong in the ordinary sense. Fussfeld's book is an excellent place to begin bringing FDR back down to earth, even if the author never meant it to be. And that concludes the article. Now, I want all of you to take a look at the world as it currently is. You take a look at the massive debt. You take a look at the fluctuations in the value of our currency. You look at the growing disparity between the so-called Wall Street elite and nearly everybody else out there. The people of this country are not losing their money per se, they are losing value. It is becoming more difficult to buy things because prices are going up. And no, prices are not going up merely because we have greedy capitalists looking to make a quick buck. No, we have higher prices because our currency is turning into toilet paper. It's not able to purchase as much. When you print more of a currency and you don't have more goods and services to match the new currency, you get inflation. FDR understood this, and he admittedly lied about it because he was playing on the ignorance of the masses, ergo most people who vote in this country. And insofar as the last statement of this review, where FDR is quoted as saying that he didn't like the idea of the presidency having too much power because a person of weaker character might come in afterwards, what have we had successively, with few exceptions, ever since his presidency? We've had just this. And we've had a ever-growing and expanding role for all other various appendages of the state, resulting in even further debt and little way to get ourselves out from under it. So what do we do in order to deal with this problem? Evidently, if we look at FDR as the model, we get into a war and we start looking at conquest as a route to pay down our debts. And indeed, that's what happened. We enjoyed a period of great prosperity immediately following World War II because we solidified ourselves as being one of the world's superpowers, and thus most of Western Europe was indebted to us for cleaning up a mess that we helped create about 30 years prior. And what do we see currently? We see wars and rumors of war all over the Middle East. We have a weak-charactered, idiotic president who is a type and shadow of the original FDR, looking for these conflicts and then talking out of both sides of his mouth, trying to convince all of us that he is a so-called peace president. He is conducting 4 wars right now in the Middle East, 2 of which were started by his predecessor and 2 of which are his own. The secret war in Pakistan being prosecuted by the CIA with Predator drones, killing hundreds upon hundreds of civilians along with supposed bad guys, and the new war in Libya, which is essentially a war based upon a very nebulous concept of protecting civilians, which, given the government in Libya, could mean absolutely everything. I covered this in a previous video. What is this all aimed at? Is this aimed at getting the oil? Well, maybe so, but if we look at the examples of Iraq and Afghanistan, there hasn't been really a major push in order to procure these resources, because we've gotten to the point now where our presidents are so dumb they can't even understand the concept of conquest, a policy of which they are trying to synthesize in order to take attention away from the debt. But they're not focusing on the primary purpose of imperialism, which is to exploit other nations of their resources. I disagree with this way of doing things completely. We have more than enough resources here to shore up our own economy. But evidently everybody else thinks that since we can't mine or drill for anything, we have to take it from every other place. And then at the same time, it's such a horrible thing to do, so we have 2 sides built upon a false premise fighting each other. This is the America that we live in right now, and it is a nation hell-bent on its own suicide. And yes, we have FDR to thank for all of it. If there are any statists out there, any FDR worshippers, any Woodrow Wilson worshippers, feel free to come on here and to chew me out, because quite frankly, I long for your hatred. You are what is wrong with this country, and you are the cause of what's currently going on right now in the Middle East, even though you insist to the contrary, even though that you insist that you oppose the war. bullshit. You voted for the guy who was giving it to us. You voted for the Congress who paved the way to it. You voted for all of it. Your tax money is supporting it. You are neck deep in it. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.